Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are exploring a truly fascinating piece of source material, a lecture titled The Origin of Happiness. Now, if you think this is just going to be another one of those abstract, feel-good philosophical theories, well, think again. We're actually going to map out a journey that takes deep, ambitious spiritual philosophy and crash tests it right against the unforgiving, gritty reality of the real world. I am genuinely so excited to unpack this with you today because it fundamentally challenges how we view our daily struggles, so let's jump right in.
We're just going to hit the ground running with the core question of this entire explainer. Does true happiness come from getting what we want or giving what we have? I know, it sounds like a simple, maybe even slightly cliché question at first glance. But the author actually uses this as the anchor for a really deep psychological and spiritual framework. Think about it. Most of us naturally default to listing the things we lack, right? Wealth, status, an easier job. And we convince ourselves that just getting those things is the magic key to happiness. But as we're going to see, the source material argues that this exact mindset is quite literally the root of human suffering.
All right, moving into section 1, starting from zero. To really understand where unhappiness comes from, we actually need to rewind all the way back to the very beginning of human life. The author introduces this foundational concept that physically and socially, every single one of us begins at the exact same starting line. Think about newborns. At birth, there's absolute equality. Every baby weighs roughly 3,000 grams. They have zero wealth, zero status, and as the author humorously points out, no one is even born wearing their own diaper. But fast forward to adulthood, and man, intense individual differences emerge. Looks, wealth, status, intelligence. The author points out that we use these stark adult differences to constantly compare ourselves to others. And that comparison, it becomes a massive engine for our own anxiety and suffering. Now, what's really interesting here is how the author totally reframes that suffering. You might be wondering, why do these painful societal differences exist at all? Well, the argument is that this friction actually matters. It's absolutely crucial. Without these differences and the powerful resistance they create, we wouldn't ever develop true individuality. I mean, if everything were perfectly easy and everyone were exactly the same, arrogance and complacency would just completely take over. So the takeaway here is that this struggle, this sheer pain of comparison and competition, is actually a necessary mechanism designed to literally polish our character and our soul.
Let's look at section 2, the pioneer's burden.
So, once we accept that friction is necessary, what happens to the people who try to push through it and forge a completely new path? We get a great historical example here from the critics of Christopher Columbus. After Columbus returned from his incredibly arduous journey, people at a celebratory banquet completely dismissed his achievements. They literally said anyone could do that once they know how. It perfectly captures how quick society is to criticize and minimize a pioneer's intense struggle the second the dust settles and the path becomes obvious.
And this leads us straight to the famous anecdote of Columbus's egg. When his critics minimized his voyage, Columbus reportedly challenged them to stand an egg on its end. Naturally, none of them could do it. So what does he do? He simply taps the egg on the table, slightly breaking the bottom, and boom, it stands upright. Of course, the critics cried foul, saying that was too easy, but the lesson here is profound. Executing a brilliant idea for the very first time requires immense courage, and you're going to face massive resistance. Doing something entirely unprecedented is incredibly isolating, no matter how ridiculously easy it looks in hindsight.
Let's ground this concept even further with another striking example from the text. The author points to Abraham Lincoln. Now, today, we think of Lincoln as this universally revered, unshakable leader. But during the Civil War, with the nation literally tearing itself apart, he faced extreme loneliness and agonizing self-doubt. The source recounts this incredibly raw story of a guest at the White House hearing a low groaning noise in the middle of the night. When they peeked through a door, the guest saw the President of the United States crawling on the floor, weeping, digging his nails into the carpet, and praying for guidance. It just goes to show that true leadership and breaking new ground involves terrifying, absolute isolation. Which brings us to section 3, balance sheet of life. Having established the sheer burden of forging a path, the author introduces a really powerful concept, applying a financial accounting framework to our moral and personal lives. Think about this. If you were to draw up a balance sheet for the first 2 decades of your life, the results are pretty startling. Under the "what I received" column, it is just overflowing. Milk, food, diaper changes, education, comforting, endless care. But then you look over at the "what I gave" column, and for the first 20 years of life, it's practically empty. You gave almost nothing back. We are all profoundly indebted to the world around us. And seeing this stark imbalance led the author to a massive aha moment during his 20s.
He had this deeply uncomfortable realization, concluding, "I am a taker. I have given almost nothing back, yet I constantly complain." He realized that his own unhappiness and internal friction stemmed directly from this dynamic. He was constantly out there demanding more from the world, more respect, more success, instead of asking how he could finally start adding some value to that "what I gave" column.
Section 4. Trials in New York.
Now, having a theoretical realization is great, but life has a funny way of testing our philosophies, doesn't it? The author headed to Wall Street as a young finance worker to truly test his beliefs in the fire of the corporate world. And his daily routine was just brutal. Waking up at 6:30 a.m., starting work at 8 a.m., processing telexes, working an exhausting 12-hour shift until 8 p.m., but his day wasn't even close to over. He'd then rush to night classes for finance at NYU and wouldn't even get back to his apartment until 2:30 in the morning. And to make matters worse, when he'd take a quick shower at 2:30 a.m., his upstairs neighbor, who was a stressed Columbia grad student, would angrily knock on the floor with a broomstick because of the noise, so he was basically operating on about 4 hours of sleep.
The crucial point to remember here is that this wasn't just mental exhaustion, it was sheer physical terror. 40 kilograms, or about 88 pounds. That was the weight of the massive Duralumin briefcase full of actual cash that he, as the youngest guy in the office, was forced to haul all around New York City, entirely alone.
The reality on Wall Street was incredibly gritty for him. While hauling that heavy cash alone to the World Trade Center, he was constantly terrified of just being hit over the head with a bat and robbed. Meanwhile, his older colleagues would literally spend their afternoons drinking, only to yell at him for being slow when he returned to do their paperwork. On top of all this, he was struggling through high-level finance classes taught entirely in rapid-fire English, sitting right alongside native Wall Street professionals. It was just absolute, overwhelming friction from every possible direction.
What's truly fascinating to me here is the intense internal conflict going on. On one hand, the author felt he had this grand spiritual calling, experiencing visions, feeling destined for a massive global mission. But on the other hand, his gritty reality was carrying heavy cash, suffering intense sleep deprivation, and enduring mundane corporate scolding. He genuinely struggled with this, wondering, if I'm supposed to have this grand mission, why am I hauling a briefcase of cash in fear for my life? Are my ideals just a complete illusion?
Let's wrap it up with Section 5, Forged in the Fire.
So, how do all these narrative arcs actually come together? Well, surviving those agonizing, exhausting days at the World Trade Center wasn't a distraction from his philosophy, it was the ultimate validation of it. The whole process is summarized perfectly right here. Step 1, endure real-world friction. You literally cannot escape the pain of differences and the grind of reality. Step 2, stop expecting to merely receive. You have to take a hard look at your position on the balance sheet of life. And Step 3, transform into a resilient giver. Surviving those worldly trials is the exact mechanical process required to transition from being a selfish taker into someone actually capable of giving massive value back to the world.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly powerful question to chew on. Are the daily struggles, the annoyances, the seemingly unfair friction you're facing right now actually the exact necessary tools needed to forge your true path? Because if we view our hardships not as punishments, but as the literal friction required to polish us from a taker into a giver, well, it kind of changes everything, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. I really hope it sparks some curiosity for you, and I'll catch you on the next one.